What's going on, everybody? I know we've heard a ton of news coming out of OTAs over the past couple of weeks, but should we really be buying into these stories? All the news, all the camp highlights, everything that we've seen so far is changing a lot of what we've seen in the market. But should we be buying it or selling it? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Chris Allen. I'm hosting the Fantasy Life podcast. Ian Hartitz back on. I don't know. He's watching cricket, like taking shots of Mai Tais. I mean, he's off watching. He's doing all sorts of stuff like overseas right now. We got another week with him enjoying his wonderful honeymoon. But of course, y'all know they wouldn't let me go ahead and run this show by myself. So without further ado, let me bring in my partner in crime, the man, the myth, the legend, Dwain the Rock McFarland. What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
What's up, Chris? I'm doing good. Yesterday afternoon, I got my hands in the dirt or touched some grass, as the kids like to say. Trimmed all the trees back from around the house. I got a new power tool, Chris. I got an electric pole saw.
Oh, hell
So
yeah.
just making sure that I came away from the whole experience with all 10 digits. I can verify they're all still here. But man, it's really nice to not have to manually saw those limbs and just have that long electric chainsaw. The shoulders are feeling good today, not as sore as normal after that type of work. But yeah, I'm doing good, man. It's OTA time. It's deciphering coach speak. It's deciphering, like, do we care, do we not care, and that's always fun.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the way that a lot of the markets have moved over the past like month or so. Because I mean, I totally understand y'all. Like, I get the fact that we are starved for actual football news. I mean, it's been what, 3 months since the Super Bowl. We're counting down the days until opening kickoff. We freaked out over the schedule. I mean, every piece of information that we're getting about the 2024 season, we want that stuff. We crave that. We crave that ability to see the way that these players are going to be out on the field. So the moment we get it, the moment we see those things, when we see those highlights, whenever beat writers are reporting what's going on in camp, that's when things start to shift. That's when we see ADP start to rise, concern coming in about whether players going to get the touch load or the carries or the targets that we're expecting from. I mean, all that stuff starts to happen. But are we really going to learn all that much about how a player is going to get deployed like it's so early in the offseason? I say no, but I'm always the skeptic. But that's why today we're going to take some of those storylines. We're going to look at some of the things that we've been hearing, the things we've been seeing, and see whether or not they're actual things we should be buying in it. Like, should we be following what the market is doing? So let's go and hop into the first one. Derrick Henry, the king, the man that was in Tennessee for however many years, now flips over and into one of the better situations that we can think of. He moves over to Baltimore. He's going to get paired with Lamar Jackson. I mean, the reigning MVP, and that we would think this is going to be a great situation. But is Derrick Henry going to be in a timeshare in 2024? Now, that's not just me saying it. I'm not just like saying stuff just to say things. Right? This coming from the beat writers, people that are like boots on the ground, talking to like Todd Monken earlier, like while they're at OTAs. This is a quote from Todd Monken. Say, well, if he carries it 300 times, we're having a hell of a year. I can tell you that. It means we're running it a lot. It means we're up in games. We want him to finish. We want him to be the closer. But first and foremost, we want him to make it through the season. It's a long season, 17 games. We'll see how that goes. He's been so durable, but I still anticipate the same of using all of our backs. Now, Dwain, I mean, that's got to be something of a hit, something of a disappointment to fantasy managers looking at Lamar Jackson, looking at Derrick Henry, and just the amount of conflict that those two on the field are going to be putting towards defenders, and of course, like racking up points for our fantasy squads. So when you hear that quote, is that something that you looked at and kind of tilted your head to the side and was like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know if Derrick Henry's somebody I want to be targeting. Or at this point in May, are you just thinking they're just being pragmatic? They're just being practical about Derrick Henry, his age, how many touches he's racked up during his career, and it's something that you're just shrugging off, and you're going to say, "Well, we'll have them deal with it, and I'll just go continue to take Derrick Henry at his current draft cost."
Yeah, a couple things. Like, first, like, I just want to zoom out real quick and just kind of say how I think about these coaching headlines, and these sound bites that we get. I could care less one about videos of a ball being dropped in a bucket against air. That moves the needle zero for me on players. So let's just get that out there. Best shape of my life talk, zero. I do care about certain archetype running backs that maybe weigh, in that 190, 195 range that have bulked up. Austin Eckler went through that in his career. So if you were to hear that about the right kind of player, like a Jahmyr Gibbs, like that kind of thing matters. But overall, best shape of his life does not matter. I do listen to what the coaches have to say. And I will say there are a couple of scenarios, Chris, where it matters most to me. One is when you've got a new head coach and offensive coordinator, or either one of those, or a new quarterback. Any mix of those things, I'm really starting to prioritize listening to what the coaches are saying, and we'll continue listening, right? This isn't the end all be all, but it's kind of that first breadcrumb, if you will. The first one you get is like in free agency. Then you get some sound bites after, the draft. And then now they're actually starting to try to implement, a new offense. So I am listening. So I care about those. The other thing is for players, and this is relevant to the one that we're talking about, that change teams. So I did some research earlier this offseason, and folks can go check it out over at fantasylife.com. And you can look at my free agency profiles that I put up. And for each position, I talk about historically what it's meant whenever players at wide receiver, running back, or tight end, what's happened whenever they change teams versus staying on the same team. So for example, when you look at running backs, rushing attempts, that's the most stable thing actually for running backs year over year. If you look at guys that didn't change teams, Chris, a RSQ, so essentially year over year, 0.683. That's a really strong score whenever you're looking at things for fantasy related. Okay. For example, yards per carry doesn't matter. 0.072, like, is what that correlation or that RSQ looks like year over year. And essentially you're just testing to see how stable is a data point. But whenever you look at running backs that have changed teams, Chris, going back to 2011, that RSQ for running backs for rushing attempts per game drops to 0.449. It's still the strongest thing for a running back changing teams, but it loses quite a bit of signal. So when you start hearing something like this around a player like Derrick Henry and all the other context that you already mentioned, the fact that we've got a guy that's got a lot of carries already on his legs, he's got the most carries outside of Zeke coming into this season. And then you look at the fact that we've already got Lamar Jackson on this team. Lamar Jackson's getting 18 to 20% of the design rushing attempts. So even before you think about coach speak or anything, you already know that you've got a quarterback that's going to get a lot more carries than what Derrick Henry is used to. Now, the question comes down to, are they going to continue to, as they have historically, which Todd Monken is pointing to, also get another running back involved? And we've actually seen the Ravens get up to 3 running backs involved. So I think that it's going to be a situation where, yes, it's going to be a committee, but that was already really the way I was forecasting this, and the fantasy life projections, if people want to go check those out. I was lower than consensus on the percentage of carries I was giving to Derrick Henry, and was just really for the reasons that we talked about. He's coming from another team. Historically, we've seen players lose signal. We've also got the fact that Lamar Jackson is involved, and we've got that long running history with Jim Harbaugh of wanting to use multiple backs. Now, you don't want to always overrate what coaches did in the past, because it really does come down to talent. You got to go look at the roster that they had. I think early in the season, though, Chris, there could be a chance that really it is all about Derrick Henry, because you won't get Keaton Mitchell back until the end of the year, unless Rasheen Ali happens to really push, and show something in camp to where he's ready for carries early in the season. But I could see a scenario where, like, in that first 4, 5, 6 games, maybe in the first 8 games, Derrick Henry's going bonkers, because it's really just him and Lamar Jackson, with Justice Hill taking over some of the passing down reps, which we don't really care about for Derrick Henry, right? They don't really get the ball. I know the other thing Munkin's talking about is, oh, we really want to get him isolated out against whatever, dude. Okay. Yeah, you guys threw
That'd
the
be
ball a
nice.
little bit more to running backs last year, but typically Lamar is going to take off versus throwing that ball as a check down to Derrick Henry. So I would say that, yeah, it's going to be a committee at some point, maybe not so much early in the year, but there's a lot of factors working against Henry. I still think he's fine where you're getting him at ADP, because we're counting on the Ravens being a really good offense.
And I think that is the best way to look at it, because if you now start to, it almost feels like we're double counting if we now start to look at these quotes and say that, oh, well, Derrick Henry might be in a timeshare, or Lamar Jackson's going to take away some goal line work, or some of the money touches, or even just like high end work that we would expect for Derrick Henry. Because over the last like 5 seasons, he's never been, like, just one time in the last like 5 years, he's been under 70% of his team's rushing attempts, which is fine. I mean, we always looked at him as that workhorse, and that's why we wanted to push him into the upper echelon in terms of draft costs, like from an ADP standpoint. But now if he's going to also have not just a, I'd say the not just a like a his workload starts to move back a little bit, but now he's on a more efficient offense, which we would assume the Ravens are going to have this season. We would hope that he gets back into the red zone a bit more often. We would think that as compared to, let's say, the other running backs, the talent that he has around him, whether Keaton Mitchell banged up, Justice Hill, I mean the other guys, they're not going to be pushing him for some of that work that would take away from his upside as a fantasy asset. So I think I'm with you here on, I'm not, this is not going to affect the way that I approach Derrick Henry's situation. I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, Todd Monken might want to hold back like where Derrick Henry is going to meet. He might want to say that, well, yeah, it'd be great to have him make sure that he's healthy for the playoffs. But I'm sure he would say the same thing about Keaton Mitchell. I'm sure he would say the same thing about any of the running backs that they currently have on their roster, because depth is something that I would say most coaches
I
are
think the
concerned
biggest
about.
storyline to watch, Chris, is Rasheen Ali. If we get to the
Yeah.
preseason and he blows up in some of the early games, and then in the last preseason game they rest him with the starters or something like that,
Hmm.
that could be a signal that maybe we're going to get into a three-way backfield, because I do think Justice Hill is going to get the passing down work early in the
Yeah, I'm with you
season.
on
So
that.
now suddenly, if Derrick Henry is having to share a little more of that early season workload with a guy like Ali, if they're trying to keep him fresh, then I think there's the potential that he's getting overdrafted. Like I said with Henry, I'm fine clicking on him right now. I don't click on him a lot, but I'm not taking
Hmm.
running backs in the third round for the most
Right.
part of fantasy drafts, unless Kyron Williams is falling, like he has been lately, to the middle of the third round, or Achan. But Henry, it's like I mix in, but I'm not like overly crazy about taking him. So I think the big thing that we've got to watch, like as we get closer to the season, is what's going on with Rasheen Ali and how the team feels about him. That would be the thing to me that would start to move the needle as to how we might want to change the projections. But if he's
Hmm.
nothing, if Rasheen Ali is like an afterthought in camp and they're playing him late into the final game of the preseason, and like we could tell he's just maybe even just battling for a roster spot, well, that's a good signal for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and so a similar situation that I wanted to bring up, you're talking about potential rookies that might eat into the incumbent running back, and this also ties into what you were talking about running back switching teams and having to deal with new coordinators. What do you think about Josh Jacobs, Dwayne? Because we've had at least a little bit of buzz regarding Matt LaFleur and what he's talking about, the potential RB rotation for the Packers this year. Josh Jacobs coming over for the Raiders, taking over for Aaron Jones, and I don't know, like what LaFleur said, I think was kind of interesting. So at a press conference, like during OTAs, Matt LaFleur, head coach of the Green Bay Packers, said, I do think he, Josh Jacobs, is very capable of being a high volume feature back where he's getting the bulk of the carries, but we'll see how it plays out. And on the RB running back rotation, typically we like to platoon those guys, whether it's two or three guys. Now, I mean, AJ Dillon, he got like a funky contract. Like, go take a look at, for folks that don't know, go and take a look at Over the Cap or Spotrac, whichever site that you use in order to figure out like how they were able to retain AJ Dillon for this season. Also brought in Marshawn Lloyd. But Dwayne, for you, I mean, how are you looking at this situation almost in the same vein as what we were talking about with Derrick Henry? Now, we do have a guy in Josh Jacobs where we have seen take on one of those higher workloads, also been at least somewhat involved in the passing game. Not to say that we expect the same thing for him now that he's a part of Green Bay with as many of the wide receivers that they have at Jordan Love's disposal. But is this a similar situation where, zooming out, you would almost say that, well, I kind of expected his workload to at least be somewhat taken a bit back, just given how the offense plays, or at least the change in scenery. So you're not taking this quote and how you would project into the season like too much to heart, or is this a little bit different? Given the fact that they have a rookie in Lloyd that could potentially work in alongside of him, also have AJ Dillon, which, regardless of what you think about him, he could actually fit into some of those short yardage goal line type carries. Or again, is it May and we just need to kind of see what we hear a bit more in camp, and like, do we see a bit more of a drumbeat for those ancillary backs, or I mean, or something along those lines?
This one matters for me because this is really how I was projecting Jacobs, was looking at that historical workload split and the fact that Jacobs has been so inefficient. I was a little concerned, like, could he take over like this huge role? I think he's the clear number one. But whenever you look at LaFleur, he's got a long running track record of not really wanting to get any of his running backs and this is an adjusted market share, so assuming that a player played every game of the year. So essentially, it's removing the games that they were injured and just looking at the games they were available to play. Like the top score we've seen is from Aaron Jones. A couple of seasons there got to right around 60%, slightly above that. And so that's where I've got Josh Jacobs, 61%. If you look at Josh Jacobs last year, 76% of the carries for the Raiders over the last 2 seasons in healthy games, 80% of the carries. That number's coming down. I feel really confident about that. And hearing LaFleur say it just makes me feel that much more confident. I'm not that worried about A.J. Dillon. I've only got him at like 6% of the carries in our projection model, but 23% I've got going to Marshawn Lloyd. I think when you look at Lloyd, he gives you a different skill set than Josh Jacobs. One thing I'll say though here, Chris, is why didn't they just keep Aaron Jones? Aaron Jones, I get it, is
Yeah.
older than Josh Jacobs, but he was closer to the end of his contract. If you take on a guy like Josh Jacobs, the thing you like about him is he can do everything and he can handle a really big workload. Now, injuries will always be a concern for any running back taking on a large workload. But kind of the best thing you can say about Josh Jacobs is he can do everything. He can take the early down work. He can take the short yardage work. He's great inside the 5. Well, he can be good inside the 5. You've also got a guy that's probably better than what most people think, on passing downs. I mean, he's not an Austin Eckler or an Alvin Kamara or a CMC, but he can catch the check downs if you need him to. He's got pretty soft hands. So he was a guy that could really come in and do everything. And now you're saying, nah, we're really just going to put him probably in the same role as we had Aaron Jones. And sorry, he's not as good as Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is just a more explosive player. So if you're wanting to keep this committee going, it's kind of strange to me that you even moved on from Aaron Jones. I know age is definitely, a factor. Josh Jacobs quite a bit younger than Aaron Jones. But yeah, I've got this right now, 61%, very similar to the thing we just talked about with Derrick Henry. I've got 61% of the rushing attempts to Josh Jacobs, which is a lot lower than his 2-year average of 80%. And just for reference, the league average running back one on a team, not running back one in fantasy, running back one on an NFL team over the last 3 years is 57% of a team's rushing attempts. So I'm slightly above that. So I've got him above the league average, but still well below what we've seen from him over the last few seasons.
And I think that makes sense just given how the running back room is currently set up. If we're not all that enthusiastic, it doesn't seem like the team is all that enthusiastic, regardless of what we think. With how much the team decided to pay AJ Dillon, doesn't seem like he's going to be much of a factor. I am somewhat, not to say concerned, I'm just more interested to see what we hear out of camp regarding Marshawn Lloyd and what he can bring to the table regarding his skill set. Because not just as a rusher, but potentially as a pass catcher, we could see Lloyd start to factor in. But I think that's where, almost similar to what we were talking about with Ali, like with the Ravens. Let's see where we're at. Like once we get into the July timeframe, once we get into camp, and if it is more of a hey, like this kid's really starting to pop. Hey, he can really start. He's really starting to catch on to the offense. Like LaFleur's raving about him, Jordan Love's raving about him. Any of the other like vets are starting to talk about how he can contribute in year one. All right, then I'm going to start to listen. But as of right now, like you said, if you got him in that 61% like team rushing share, for Jacob specifically, I kind of like where that's at. And given where he's going in drafts right now, I would say I haven't clicked on Josh Jacobs a ton, like in underdog drafts. Like he is more the type of guy where, like, if he's available, if I see him slipping past ADP, okay, fine. But some of the wide receivers that I typically see going in that range of drafts, or even the quarterbacks and tight ends as well, it's like I would much rather click on those guys, like versus like targeting Josh Jacobs. It's more of like a oh, he's there. Okay, I guess I'll take him versus, oh, I'm gonna search through like the ADP, like, oh, am I gonna be able to get Josh? I just don't feel that way about him. Like once I get into the draft lobby.
Yeah, I mean, and Marshawn Lloyd's my most drafted running back right now.
So that tells you all you need to
So
know.
yeah, so well, I mean, I like the rookies all for where they're priced right now. Corum is my second most drafted guy, so it's not me necessarily believing I know which one of those rookie running backs is going to hit because some of it's going to be contingent on injury. But just knowing that those are the kind of guys that, especially in best ball, when you're trying to win a massive tournament, really, I mean, any kind of format you're playing in, you want to have you want to have some arrows in the quiver, right, if you will,
Yeah.
for at the end of the season to have a chance to get some of these eruption games. And I just think the rookies are priced well. Lloyd is one that sometimes slips past ADP more than the others, so I've got a little bit more of him, but I like all of those guys. And Lloyd does offer the explosiveness that would make him a good counterpunch to Josh Jacobs. So I feel like the narrative also works where it's like, okay, you want two different kind of players. These are two different players. They contrast versus AJ Dillon. It's kind of hard to say this as inefficient as Josh Jacobs was last year, but like AJ Dillon is a poor man's Josh Jacobs. So
Yes.
I feel like Dillon is probably a guy that would be a little bit of a thorn in the side of Marshawn Lloyd if Josh Jacobs went down. But I don't know that it would take long for Lloyd to overtake Dillon. We've seen him long enough at this point. We all know AJ Dillon, like, yeah, he's quadzilla. He's got, he's got a huge ass, big quads, big calves. It
Yeah.
just doesn't add up on the field, though, man. This guy doesn't run with the power you would think. He's not explosive. So, yeah, I think that the combination, if you're looking for a combination of two backs in a platoon, I think the most sense is Josh Jacobs with Marshawn Lloyd.
I agree. I definitely agree there. And like for Josh Jacobs right now on Underdog Fantasy, Josh Jacobs going around like the 41st, 42nd overall. You can get Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, Rashad White, almost Rashad White is going almost a full round or like past a full round past him. I would prefer most of those guys. Rashad White, maybe not, but at least the wide receivers going around him. You got T. Higgins also going around him. Lamar Jackson gets drafted like shortly thereafter. So it's like
I
there are,
think the market correction's been good. He should
yeah.
have been going next to other inefficient backs, Rashad White and
Mhm.
Joe Mixon, and he keeps getting closer and closer to those. So
Yeah.
I started drafting him some now that he's falling because now that he's in round 4 for the right build, I don't mind clicking on him depending on what I'm trying to do with my team. But if he gets
Mhm.
into round 5, I think then he would really be priced right, and I would feel
Yeah.
more comfortable basically mixing him up with any of those other guys because one, they're the same profile, and that's the beauty of tiers, right? Is we're admitting we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but we think these players all have similar paths to value based on the archetype of player they are, and I think that he fits strongly in that tier with Rashad White and with Joe Mixon.
And I think when you bucket players in that fashion, understanding like what they are and what they can bring to the table, I think that allows you to set up the rest of your draft in such a way that, all right, well, I know what Josh Jacobs is. I know what Rashad White can bring to the table. So now adding a bit more upside or adding a bit
Yep.
more pop, like inserting some of the rookies you were talking about later in drafts, Blake Corum or whomever. I mean, that allows your roster to kind of have that flexibility, at least at the running back position, assuming that you're building either high end wide receivers or quarterbacks or tight ends or whatever, like they're in order to provide that upside, like other parts of your roster. But now, excellent discussion, I think, to start things off. Let's move over to, we're talking running backs. Let's flip over to some wide receivers. And this is probably a team that a lot of folks are interested in. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, even just like a real life standpoint, after they were just more or less one play away from getting to the Super Bowl, and that's the Detroit Lions. And talking specifically about Jameson Williams, no more Josh Reynolds. I mean, we've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was at least briefly the highest paid like wide receiver like in the league. I think shortly after, before like some other contracts came in. But Jameson Williams now entering what, third season now with the Lions. Talking about, I mean, him descending into that wide receiver one status. I mean, Dan Campbell, the knee biter himself, or the man talking about like biting knees. It's talking about Jameson Williams. He's a man on a mission. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's what Dan Campbell had to say about Jameson Williams. So, I mean, Dwain, are you buying this? Is this something that you're going to buy at this point in the offseason? Because I'm remembering, like, famously, it wasn't Jameson Williams that dropped that pass that didn't allow the Lions. I mean, sorry, Lions fans, sorry, Detroit fans, but it wasn't Jameson Williams that dropped that pass. It was Josh Reynolds. That was the one. That was the player that Jared Goff was looking for in a critical situation, like for the Lions. And we know what Amon-Ra St. Brown is to the team. We know what Sam Laporta is to the team. We know what Dave Montgomery, Jameer Gibbs. We know what all those guys are. So now you're expecting me to believe that Jameson Williams is going to be the wide receiver one, like for this offense. He's going to be the guy that we need to push up and start targeting in drafts. I don't know. I'm being skeptical, maybe just as a bit. I don't know yet. I haven't decided. But either way, I mean, is it something that like Jameson Williams for 2024, are you buying it or not?
So last year when Jameson Williams really was unable to pass Josh Reynolds, an NFL journeyman, that bothered me. I think if you're looking at Jameson Williams and you want to have the rose-colored glasses view on him, it is the fact that he didn't play much as a rookie coming off of that late season ACL tear in his final season of college. So that was a slow start to the season as we expected. And then the next year, obviously, he had the suspension. So you could say really he's only got 1 season of NFL play under his belt. He is a former round 1 NFL draft pick. Those are the positives. The negatives are that he never could fully take control again over a journeyman like Josh Reynolds, who is not a high-end target earner. He's not a high-end player. So for a round 1 pick to not have already been able to catapult him without them just deciding we're going to move on and force Jameson Williams into the lineup, I don't know what else we expected. This one's really much to do about nothing for me. Anybody that's done their projections or really thought about the Lions at all already knew Jameson Williams was in for a full-time role because the Lions don't have another option. They don't have anywhere else to go. So it's almost to me like Dan Campbell has been hard on Jameson Williams historically, but now maybe he's just trying a different approach of building him up because he knows he's got to be on the field. JMO becoming the number 1 target on the Lions, no way. 17% targets per route run over his first 2 seasons. That's wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 material. I think you're looking at hoping he's a Gabe Davis right now. He could look, we'd never want to discount an early round 1 pick. And he's a guy that I liked a lot whenever he came out of college. So I want to put that all out there. So there's always room for him to improve, but he's got Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta there. Like, I mean, those are the top 2 guys in the offense. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get his work out of the backfield as well. To me, those 3 players are the priority in your passing game. So I think what's going to happen to JMO is, okay, when other teams focus on them, like, can you improve enough to be the guy that when Jared Goff sees you get single coverage, which ain't very often in the NFL anymore? We're getting less and less man coverage. We're getting less and less of the types of defenses that would allow an archetype like Jameson Williams to succeed, which would be coming through on big plays and touchdowns. It's just harder and harder. Now, Goff will go to that player if they're open. He's got a history of showing that he'll do that. But I just think it's a crowded offense and you need an injury to one of the other teammates. Having said all of that, I do think JMO was a little bit underpriced for a while. And now he's climbed up an ADP where he's actually ahead of where I've got him projected and ranked. And I'm not moving JMO up from where I've got him right now. So I'm a little bit below what the market says based on recent best ball drafts, but I'm right in the range. And I feel good about that. I think he's fine if you want to take him, as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. Counting on him for anything more than that, I think it's really risky, in my opinion. So this is one that I just feel like, great. I got a quote from Dan Campbell. I really don't care. This guy was going to have to play all the snaps anyway. The bigger thing I care about is he hasn't shown us enough on the field to this point.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you on that one as well because if he was only unable to really, to your point, take the job away from Josh Reynolds, we still saw Khalif Raymond like pop up in a number of games last season too, and with the other target earners, like high end target earners that he has sitting there in front of him, it's hard for me to see a case for him to actually start to really get into the point where we can consider him even in like the wide receiver, like 2, like low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 range. It's just there's not enough passing volume within the Lions in order to support that. Last season, bottom 10 and pass rate over expectation. I mean, so if you're telling me, like, and that's just overall, I mean, once they get into the red zone, and especially once they get inside the 10, we all knew that once they got inside the 10, especially for folks that was rostering Jahmyr Gibbs, we all knew it was going to be David Montgomery coming in order to bang in the touchdown thereafter. So if we can't expect more passing volume for the Lions, and we know who the primary target earners are going to be from Amon-Ra St. Brown all the way down to, like, you can toss in like Jahmyr Gibbs potentially as well, trying to shoehorn Jameson Williams into this offense, or not shoehorn him in office, but shoehorn him into this wide receiver 3 type role for fantasy purposes, it just seems a bit, I don't know. I feel like we're overextending ourselves, at least to some degree. Now, the one point that I would make that I don't know, it would require a bit of a shift in how in how Jameson Williams has been deployed on the field is that change in role. Does he take over the Josh Reynolds type role? Because last season, I mean, a lot of where Williams was running his routes and how he was being used, I mean, his average depth of target last year was something over 16 yards. Josh Reynolds, closer to like 11-ish yards. So if they are trying to incorporate Williams a bit more in the sense that, yeah, just get the ball in his hands a bit more, allow him to run after catch, and more screens, like more end arounds, because over the back end of the season, we did see some of those rushing attempts. What was it? Week 11, week 12, when they played against the Saints, he runs in that long touchdown. He had a couple of those in week 16, 17, somewhere in there, like when they played against the Vikings. So if they start to use him a bit more in that role, more intermediate targets versus relying more on the deeper shots, which he was getting like last season, okay, fine. But that's a change. I mean, we're projecting a shift in how he gets used on the field, which we don't really know how that's going to be. But if that is a role, or that's if he starts to take on like what Reynolds was like for the team last season, okay, fine, I can buy into that. But right now, we don't know that. All we know is that Josh Reynolds is gone. Jameson Williams can potentially move into at least some of that volume, but how he's being used on the field, that's not something we can project. So for me right now, again, I think Jameson Williams is like properly priced, but is he somebody again that I'm targeting? Probably not. But again, it's more about, can we really see him ascending into, or like evolving, or I guess starting to like mature into that role, and that's something we can't really project at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think we can move, to the next one. When I look at JMO, I think, the biggest thing is I'm giving him 80% route participation. That's the average for a wide receiver two on an NFL team over the last 3 years. So I feel like I'm already like giving him something just by doing that. And to your
Yeah.
point, projecting him to suddenly change, like his ability to open up other areas of the route tree, it could happen. And I agree with you. I think that's the other out for him. But that's also the area of the field that Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta already work. So you
Yep.
think about complementary football, do they really need Jameson running more of those routes versus clearing things out for 3 intermediate to underneath targets in Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jahmyr Gibbs?
Right. So that's tough. I mean, here I'm hopeful that Jameson Williams gets to the point where he evolves into the game that we all thought he was going to become, or like the wide receiver we thought he was going to come out of college. But that's still a bit tough right now to project, like for 2024. But here's an offense that we think could actually evolve in 2024, and that's the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young, Dave Canales coming over from Tampa Bay after we saw the new head coach for the Carolina Panthers in Canales actually not just take Geno Smith and bring him into the quarterback we know today, but also Baker Mayfield, having him be the comeback guy that we saw in 2023 when Canales was with the Bucks. So now seeing Canales paired with Bryce Young, we've been seeing a bit more, at least the general hype that we would want to see for a guy like Bryce Young after the disastrous year one for Young. Now, according to Tommy Tremble, talking about Bryce Young, saying that he's throwing the ball with confidence. He's not worried about 1,000 things like last year. You can see that swag, the confidence, exciting. Deontay Johnson, coming from the Steelers down to Carolina, said he's a great quarterback, accurate, smart. He knows how to get his guys in position. Wherever we're out there, you can always count on him to get us in the right spot and make sure everybody knows what they're doing. So it's good to hear, Dwayne. I mean, it's good to hear that the vets and all the guys around the team are starting to at least show some, like, talk positively about their quarterback. But is this something that, I mean, should we keep pounding the table for Bryce Young? I mean, after him being what, bottom end, like back end of the league in terms of completion percentage over expected, like the highest pressure to sack rate last year of all quarterbacks. Uh, I'm drafting him just given his price, and we do like some of the pass catchers that are associated with him. But is this something that we should at least start to target a guy like Bryce Young in drafts, or are you just kind of like, well, it could be something that we should monitor right now, but you're not really buying as much?
This is another one where I could care less what Tommy Trimble, as Ian and I like to call him, Tommy Trimbles. I really don't care what he has to say. Teammates are gonna talk good about teammates, period, right? So I don't really care about that, but what I care about is I am buying into Bryce Young just because the fact that I think it's the most improved offense in the NFL. You could argue that maybe we should give that mantle to the Bears. There are a couple of other teams in the running. You could argue that with what the Falcons did at quarterback and offensive coordinator between Kirk Cousins and Penix and getting rid of Arthur Smith and moving to Zach Robinson, a former Sean McVay guy,
Yep.
that's in the mix as well. But it's one of the most improved offenses in the league. This is the first overall pick from a year ago, and I'm just not going to throw in the towel on him yet. So you already mentioned it. Yeah, Deontay Johnson, target earner at really all levels of the field, mostly intermediate and underneath, but he can win on the outside against anyone. You put him in the slot, he's even better. You've got Adam Thielen, who had a good year last year for someone being as old as he is. Do we think he's going to hold up and be this elite wide receiver for forever? No, but now he could be as low as the wide receiver 3, depending on what Xavier Legette does. And I'm not a huge Legette guy just because he broke out so late in college. Year 5, didn't do anything before that, but it was in the SEC. So at least he did it, against other good competition, Chris. So all I can say is that the Panthers are trying. They added 2 guards, Robert Hunt, $100 million contract, Damian Lewis coming over from Seattle. So the pressure and those things, 62 sacks last year for Bryce Young. That was the second most in the NFL. So keeping him clean, adding the weapons, I expect a big step forward from Bryce Young this year. In our projection model, if you go look at the team level stuff, you'll see I'm above market on the Panthers. I don't have them as one of the top offenses in the league, but I have them above market versus what Vegas expectations are versus, at the team level for passing yards and things like that. So I think there's definitely some meat on the bone. And the beauty of it, Chris, is like the guy's going at basically pick 200 in drafts right now. So you can get him for absolutely for free. He is right now checking on my underdog stuff. See, he was my most drafted quarterback.
Mm.
So completed, checking it out. Yeah, right now my exposure on Bryce Young, and again, a lot of this is price. Yep, he's my most drafted quarterback at 28% of my teams, and I've drafted 75. So, I mean, the price is just super cheap. I think there's so much room for upside. And at the price, Chris, Bryce Young doesn't even have to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback. Like, that's the outcome you're betting on, hoping that he somehow unlocks that or becomes a borderline QB1. I think that's in the range of outcomes. But if he just, is somehow in the top 18, like you're getting a value. And if you get some spike weeks, he's super easy to stack late as well because you get Deontay Johnson in round 7. Legette, is going, I'm trying to remember, round 12 or 13, somewhere in there. And then Adam
Yeah.
Thielen is after that. If you want to get spicy and sprinkle in occasionally a Jatavian Sanders kind of thing, you can get him in the last round. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can stack Bryce Young. And again, I think it's one of the most improved offenses in the NFL.
100% agreed on all points, honestly. And the way that I was thinking about this, because I would say that some of the hype comes from Dave Canales, right? I mean, we saw what he did for Geno Smith 2022. Saw the same thing when he was with Baker Mayfield in 2023. I mentioned that a bit ago. And the one part that I would say is that it's not just, oh, okay, well, Canales had Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, throwing deep, play action, boot action, like throwing down the perimeter, like accessing the deeper parts of the field. And something similar happened when he was with the Bucks this last year. Oh, Baker Mayfield, okay, play action, Mike Evans down the field, like deep passes and all that. And now I wouldn't say people should try and map that same type of approach like over to what he can do with the Panthers. They don't have that same personnel. And I think Canales has mentioned in his press conferences is not about like really like harping on like those concepts. It's about finding like what the quarterback is most comfortable with. And surprisingly enough, one of the things that Bryce Young was most comfortable with was actually passing over the middle of the field. Like his EPA per dropback was at its highest, like when he was passing like between the hashes, like or towards the middle parts of the field. And if you look at the types of receivers that they went out to get, already having Adam Thielen, I mean, Jonathan Mingo. I mean, if you look at folks that evaluate wide receivers like Matt Harmon and reception perception, one of his better parts, like when he for Mingo when he was still in college, was being able to run like some of those timing routes, those digs, those comebacks, like things like that. The same thing with Xavier Legette. So it's like the personnel, and of course you already mentioned Deontay Johnson. So like the personnel matches what Bryce Young is good at. DJ Chark was never going to be a good fit for what Bryce Young can do on the field. And so now that you have this personnel that fits, you got Canales who can put people in the right places, the concepts that they use in order to really start to hone in on what Bryce Young is capable of. I think all of it starts to at least lend itself to the fact that Young, this offense, these receivers, this could actually work for him in 2024. And to your point, where they're going right now, I mean, Bryce Young is cheap. Xavier Legette going at 138 overall, Thielen in the 160s. I mean, of course, they have the Week 17 bring back with the Bucks. I mean, a lot of that like kind of speaks to like what we can see like for the Panthers in 2024.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Panthers check all the boxes I want. And the main thing, Chris, as our normal other co-host, Ian Hardix likes to say, is hate the ADP, not the player. Or you can
Yeah.
also flip that and say love the ADP, not even necessarily the player. And I just love the ADP on all of these players.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's it. All right. Well, let's flip over. Let's switch real quick. Focus from football over to basketball. I mean, and talk about like our sponsor for today, and that's of course that's DraftKings. Basketball fans, we've seen it all this season. I mean, rookies rising to the top. I mean, legends leaving their legacy on the court. Then just a few weeks left to get on the action. Right now, not tomorrow, not yesterday, like right now, you can get in all the action with DraftKings Pick Six, a brand new way to play daily fantasy sports. All new customers who pay $5 will get $50 in Pick Six credits. So getting started is simple. Just download the DraftKings Pick Six app and sign up with our code questions. Pick at least two players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. Pick any stat. Like, will they score more or less than 30 points or have less than 8 assists? Like, whatever you think. Lock them in and compete against others for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the Pick Six app now and sign up with our code questions only on DraftKings Pick Six. The crown is yours. All right. So back to let's talk ball for a little bit longer. Let's pick up the pace a little bit. I mean, this one I think is fairly easy, man. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills real quick. All right, Josh Allen, no Stephon Diggs. Everybody's wondering about what the offense is going to look like. We got Keon Coleman talking about getting jackets at Macy's and all this other stuff. But OC Joe Brady talking about the Bills' offense for 2024 said at the end of the day, this is Josh Allen's offense. What does that mean? I mean, like I hear that and I'm just like, okay, well, I mean, the Bills are obviously going to be, especially with Josh Allen still under center, they're going to be one of the most hyped or most talked about offenses throughout this offseason because we just don't know what they're going to look like. Still, right now, Josh Allen is going off the board as what the QB1 in most underdog draft. He's going to be the first quarterback going off. So it seems kind of odd in my book that we're going to have questions about the Bills' offense pretty much all the way up until until opening kickoff in September. Still going to take Josh Allen as the quarterback one. But if it's what is the Josh Allen offense to you, Dwayne? And do you really care about like what the offense is going to look like as a whole? Or are you just saying, screw it, I'm just going to take Josh Allen when I can and we'll just figure it out afterwards?
Well, the good news is we already saw Josh Allen in the Joe Brady offense, which basically slowed everything down. Plays per minute over expectation, below the league average last year. Once Joe Brady took over, drop back rate over expected, -3 percentage points versus the NFL average. Those are not things that you would say are synonymous with a Josh Allen offense. But that's how they won last year, and that's the offense Josh Allen ran with Joe Brady at quarterback. So I think the beauty of Josh Allen is you don't have to really pigeonhole him into any kind of offense. I think he can run any offense. And if that means that you're not as confident in your pass catchers because maybe Keon Coleman doesn't quite come around, maybe, you've got the situation where Dalton Kincaid doesn't take the step forward that we think that he can, whatever the case may be, you can always play ball control. You can let Josh Allen run the ball into the end zone and you can make him a major part of your run game. So I think the beauty of Allen is that he's really insulated. Last year, we already saw, I think, worst case from a standpoint of, oh my God, what if they don't throw the ball that much? And he was still a great fantasy quarterback because we saw a major uptick in how he was used, on the ground. So, like, if you look at Josh Allen from the time Joe Brady took over last year, Chris, 14 or 19% of the design rushing attempts for the team. He had 14% on the year. That went up to 19% once Joe Brady took over as play caller. Also scrambled more, 9% scramble rate down the stretch after Joe Brady's takeover. So I think it could mean, oh, we're going to throw the ball more like what you're used to seeing for Josh Allen. And that's great. That means the receivers have matured in a way where that's the game plan they should take. But if it doesn't come to fruition and what they really mean is, oh, no, we're going to run the offense we ran last year at the end of the season, that's still okay. Now, you don't have the upside of Josh Allen throwing for 5,000 yards and running for 750 and 10 rushing touchdowns. We like that ceiling more, but he's already shown, man, the floor is really high with Josh Allen no matter what offense they run. So don't really care what that. I'm with you, though. I'm like, what does that mean? What does it mean? But the beauty is either whether we know the answer or not, we kind of know what the two ways are that they could go, and they both work out fine for Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that's all we care about because we're getting a lot of his pass catchers at just like some really good prices right now on Underdog. I mean, whether it's if you're doing like the high end tight end or like the elite tight end route and taking Dalton Kincaid and somewhere in like the late 40s, somewhere in there. I mean, Keon Coleman going in like the sixth, seventh ish round or not sixth ish round, like somewhere in there. Curtis Samuel going like a few rounds after that, and of course Khalil Shakir going like somewhere like the 100s, like 110,
Dude,
111.
27 fantasy points per game for Josh Allen once Joe Brady took over and slowed the
That's
whole offense
nuts.
down. See, the thing is, like, it doesn't matter which
Yeah.
offense they run. Josh Allen right now is one of my favorite picks at ADP. Anytime he slips to round 4 for me, I take him, and I take him quite often once I get to that tier break in the middle to late round 3 where I lose some confidence. So I'm like, oh, I could take Malik Neighbors, or I just grab Josh Allen and turn around and grab Dalton Kincaid. And then to your point, I can come back in round 7 or 9 and get one of Keon Coleman or Curtis Samuel. And if I want to tack on Khalil Shakir, I can. So I think Josh Allen is actually a great pick right now in best ball drafts.
And actually, the more that I think about it, what is it going to take for in terms of like off-season hype for any of his pass catchers to really start to
Not
ascend in
much.
ADP? Like
One training camp reel.
yeah, but
Won't
it's
take
like
much.
we're already hearing about what Keon Coleman working with CeeDee Lamb on his route running. Okay, cool. What Khalil Shakir, like we already had, like I think the three of us, like me, you, and Ian, like we already talked about what Shakir could be in this offense. We saw what Curtis Samuel was in his last bit, like in Washington. I mean, it's like you would need to see like in order for there to be some sort of monumental shift in ADP, there would have to be just like a massive drumbeat just for one of them. But right now, I think it's so I would say just like nebulous in terms of how the targets shake out. I feel like there's not going to be a massive shift in cost for
I think
any
there
of
will
them.
be.
You think
Whichever one of
so?
these guys goes off in the first playoff game, I guarantee you they move
Oh,
up in
that part,
ADP.
yeah, yeah,
Guaranteed. Guaranteed. If Josh Allen comes out and plays 2 drives and Samuel has 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, he's moving up. Keon Coleman has 6 catches for, 60 yards and a touchdown, he's moving up. Khalil Shakir, doesn't matter. Whichever one of these guys go off in each of those playoff games, it's going to move ADP because people are going to suddenly, start double counting to your point. Oh my, this is Josh Allen. Well,
yeah,
no, yeah, we know it's Josh Allen, right? But
right,
that doesn't
yeah,
change probably what we should think long term about the wide receiver, but it will. I guarantee you one of these guys. The only way it doesn't is if they don't play the starters much, or
hmm,
or it's just kind of, oh, one target to Keon, two to Curtis Samuel, and one to Shakir, and then Josh Allen goes to the bench. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the scenario where I think they stay the same. Any one of them blows up in that game 1, 2, or even the dress rehearsal. Which dress rehearsal? What does that even mean anymore? Because the
Right.
teams all use different things. But any of those guys on the field with Josh Allen blowing up, and when I say blowing up, just catching a touchdown that goes on to Sports Center, they're going to go up in ADP. But we can't tell you which one that's going to be.
Well, I can tell you who it's gonna be. It's gonna be Dawson Knox. That's who's gonna catch the touchdown. Like, that's probably what's gonna happen.
Now
Like
that could move Dalton Kincaid down, which I would
yeah.
be okay with.
Like, they're gonna like, one of them like, Curtis Samuel's gonna get 6 targets, and then Keon Coleman's gonna catch 1 down the field, and then Dawson Knox is gonna get the touchdown. Like,
Score the 3-yard
to
touchdown.
score
Yeah,
the 3-yard touch. That's exactly how it's
you're
gonna go.
right.
I
Good
can tell you
call.
that right now. All right. Flipping over from the Bills, let's go to the AFC North. Najee Harris, best shape of his life season. I know, Dwayne, like, you're probably gonna hate this, but, I mean, reportedly, he's in the best shape of his life, slimmed down a little bit. We don't have to worry about, his foot being that much of a problem. I know that was something that was an issue throughout the earlier parts of the 2023 season. But Najee Harris, according to the Pittsburgh Post Gazette, he's been almost obsessively clean about his diet throughout the offseason. Lots of fish and vegetables, slimmed down to about 235, or no, actually, they're saying he actually might be down to 220. But what does this mean for fantasy drafts? I mean, do you care about the fact that we could see a potentially healthier, at the very least, healthier version of Najee Harris and how that affects Jalen Warren? Because after last season, I mean, just pick a stat. Doesn't even have to be a rushing stat. It could be a receiving stat. And Warren graded out as the better of the 2 running backs for Pittsburgh. So, I mean, are you taking this as a grain of salt? Do you think Warren is going to be still like the guy to roster a bit more than Najee Harris? Because now I think for most folks that are going either the zero RB route or even just looking at running backs around the range that both of the Pittsburgh Steelers RBs are going, people are starting to prefer Najee Harris, I think he's become like the more trendy pick right now. But does this move the needle for you at all? Or is it just like, I don't know, let's find out like in terms of ADP, who's available at cost and you'll just take one of them?
It doesn't move the needle for me at all, especially for the archetype back that Najee Harris is, right? You always got to put the additional context in. Getting a little lighter is not suddenly going to make Najee Harris a way more explosive back. It's not going to change his foot speed. Najee's still going to be who he is. He's a between the tackles banger. He's never going to be this huge explosive playmaker. So uh, maybe it gives him a marginal improvement. So I just don't see it suddenly turning him into this explosive back, which we already know that Jalen Warren is. So in a vacuum between these two guys, they're right next to each other in ADP. Like I want my portfolio 65% percentage ish on the Jalen Warren side. And the main reason why is if suddenly Jalen Warren finds himself as the primary back in this backfield for whatever reason, Chris. And I do think he has more outs because if Najee just continues to stink and they didn't pick up his year 5 option, they're eventually moving on from Najee. It's just a matter of when, and it could happen in the season this year. Or if Najee gets hurt, Jalen Warren could be a league winner. If Jalen Warren gets knocked out, I don't see Najee being a league winner. I see him potentially being a value. You're getting him in round 8 of your fantasy draft. So I think Najee's fine where he's priced. But when I think about the ceiling, Jalen Warren's is just so much higher. I mean, we're talking about a guy with targets per route run, on the level with some of the most elite receiving running backs that we've seen historically. Missed tackles forced per attempt, yards after contact, all the stuff you were mentioning. We could go down the line, explosive rush rate, all those things really go hand in hand with when you look up the name of Jalen Warren. So I just absolutely love Jalen Warren. And so I want to get as much as possible, but I will hedge a little bit and take some Najee just because we don't know exactly how it will work out. But in the case it does work out where you get to be right on one or the other, I just feel like there's a much more bullish case for Jalen Warren being a guy that you're clicking through all your best ball lineups at the end of the year and you're thinking, man, God, I hope I have so and so on my lineup. Jalen Warren, like you could be quickly searching for all your teams that have him because you could be thinking, man, I don't know if I can win this thing without him. I don't know that we can say that about Najee.
I think that's where I'm at, like with Najee. What's the question I've seen? It might have been the ship chasing guys that have put this out there. This might be a Karanism or something like that. But like, what do you win when you win? So if you are the person that's rostering Najee Harris, and I think you laid it out.
Yeah. What do you win when you're right? Yeah.
Yeah, what do you win when you're right? What do you win when you roster when you say nope? I'm just going to take Najee Harris at his cost in like the 8th-ish round or something like that, where he's going right now. You'll probably get a guy that's going to finish somewhere in like I don't know, like overall, like a 4th round maybe type value. Let's say like Jalen Warren, knock on wood, gets hurt. He takes over most of the workload. He winds up being that
Put him
guy
in
that's
that range
gonna,
with Najee and those guys. I
yeah,
mean, not I mean with sorry, Mixon and some of the other guys we talked about.
yeah. And like that's where he would most likely end up. Should he be like the standalone running back for the Steelers for the entirety of the season? Arthur Smith, last 2 seasons when he was with the Falcons, 31st and 32nd in pass rate over expectation. We know the volume's going to be there for the Steelers. All right, that's fine. But what do you win if you make that same bet on a guy like Jalen Warren? I mean, 1.46 like yards per route run last season. I mean, in terms of running backs, I mean that is like one of the highest, like or a high end mark that you can hit in terms of efficiency just as a receiver. And then if you factor in the explosive rush rate, like for Jalen Warren and what he's capable of doing, like with the ball in his hands as a runner, I mean, we are talking about a guy that could really push into like that first, second, third round, like type of running back, the guy that you would really want to have on your roster should he fall into like that type of workload. So that's where I don't care as much. Like it's great to see that Najee Harris is healthy, great to see that he's taking care of his body, and great to think about the idea of him being able to hold up for the entirety of the 2024 season. But if you are want to make that same type of bet from a fantasy standpoint, especially if we're talking about best ball and trying to win one of these tournaments, Warren's upside, his ceiling is so much higher than Najee Harris's that regardless of ADP, and they are kind of the market is hedging on the two. They are like fairly like they are side by side. Warren just still to me grades out as the guy that you should be targeting like over Harris, regardless of if you're trying to project out for like the 17 game season.
Yep.
All
100%.
right. Couple more running back situations we want to target for today before we head on out of here. This one should be fairly easy. Houston Texans, Dameon Pierce, D'Amico Ryan's like talking about like Dameon Pierce in terms of like the amount of work that he's put in this offseason, and Joe Mixon potentially as a 1-2 punch. Are you buying that? I can't. I just can't. After I saw Dario Ngumbuale like playing in the playoffs, like I can't. I can't do it. I can't do it with Dameon Pierce as of right now. I'm just waiting for him to maybe move on to another team. Maybe he finds another spot on another roster at some point after the conclusion of the 2024 season. But D'Amico trying to hype up, one of the vets on his squad, I can totally understand that. But I pretty sure D'Amico told us all he needed, him and Bobby Slowick, rather, the OC for the Texans. I think they told us all we need to know about Pierce and what he brings to the table for this Texans offense after we saw what he did in the playoffs and throughout most of the regular season last year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it as a 1A, 1B. I could see this being right now. I've got it projected 61% of the carries to Joe Mixon, so right in that same range with the other inefficient backs that we've talked about. With Josh Jacobs, I mean, that's kind of my rule of where I put these guys. I've got them. I know they got paid, so I've got them above the league average, but I don't let the model get way out of whack on them. So that leaves room. So right now I've got Dameon Pierce at 27% of the rushing attempts for the team. The league average for a running back two on an NFL roster is 29%. So I'm below average on Pierce, slightly above average on Joe Mixon, but not going crazy on either one of them. I do love Dameon Pierce with your last pick. Or your second to last pick, depending on how you built out your roster over in best ball, just because we know Joe Mixon's not very efficient and he's getting older. He's got a lot of touches on his body. If he somehow went down, Dameon Pierce could surprise us. Like, he could come in and play a lot better. I've seen some people say, well, he just can't run in a gap scheme, blah, blah, blah. I pay attention to those things and I chart all that stuff. But what I'll tell you guys is the stability of how good a running back is year over year in a certain kind of scheme or with a certain kind of run design play. It's not strong. We can see that jump all over the place. So I wouldn't get ahead of ourselves and read too much into that. Now, if the data is telling you that and you feel like if you got a really strong line on that from someone that really knows film, like a Matt Waldman or someone like that, also telling you, then you can put two and two together and you might decide you want to stay away from Dameon Pierce in this zone design scheme. And he obviously took a step back last year, right? And that was in this Slowick scheme. So I think there's some concerns, but where you're getting them, again, ADP, people are just basically not paying attention, to Dameon Pierce. So especially with how expensive it is to build a Ravens Texans stack, and you don't want to be thinking so much about stacks in the first 5 rounds. But Chris, you get to end round 5, if you're trying to build anything, with a week 17 bring back for your Texans teams or for your Ravens teams, all the stars are gone.
Mhm.
You're not getting any of the stars from those teams. The quarterbacks are gone. I mean, you could get Dalton Schultz, right? You're mainly looking at backups, right? You're,
Mhm.
you're you're looking at scrolling down, as they like to say in the best ball streets. And so Dameon Pierce becomes a guy. Like, if I got Lamar and Andrews and it was able to make that pairing work, and I didn't have a Nico or a Diggs already on my team, and I'm trying to say, okay, I need something in that game, then I like going for a Dameon Pierce. And that's how I kind of force myself to get some exposure to a guy like Dameon Pierce, and try not to pretend that I know more than I really do. Last year was not encouraging, but year one was pretty encouraging. So the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle on Dameon Pierce. And right now he's so cheap, I'm fine with it.
I think that's you might have sold me on it. And I think that's the ADP, or his opportunity cost associated with drafting Pierce, it's the thing that a lot of drafters and myself, I need to take a bit more into account. Because let's say, again, even the fact that, let's say, if Joe Mixon starts to get worn down, or let's say that the injuries start to crop up or whatever, and we see Pierce have to come in for a few games. We already know that he has the profile of a running back that can take over for a game or two or three, regardless of how long like Mixon could potentially be out throughout the season. We know that Pierce already has the profile in order to take over and have that 60% workload. Like, should he be the only guy on the roster? So I'm not into let's figure out like what type of scheme fits best for those guys. It's just like, can you give them the rock and can they run with it for like 15 to 20 touches per game? Should they be put in that type of situation? And if we are looking at some of the other running backs that are going in that range, I mean, from the Khalil Herberts, the Roshan Johnsons, I mean, the Chicago guys, or I mean, insert backup running back here. Like, once we get into the 180s, 190s in terms of ADP, I'm not as leery about those guys. And so if we're not as concerned about drafting some of those later round running backs, but like, again, we have such a bad taste in our mouth after what we saw from Pierce, I think we do need to at least turn the page, look at what his situation for 2024 is going to be. And like you said, if we are kind of targeting that Houston Baltimore matchup as one that we want for the week 17 type of edge, then having to make a nasty click like him or Robert Woods or Dalton Schultz. I mean, like any one of
Hey,
those
you can
guys.
get your Devontae Walker shares that way. You can get your
Exactly.
Rashad Bateman shares that way. And
Yes.
Bateman's moved up a little bit, over the last couple of weeks, which is good to see. He was projecting well in our model anyway. So
Mhm.
he was a value. Now he's basically his projection is putting him close to where he's going in ADP based on his range of outcomes. And if anybody wants to check out the projections, you can go over and check them out. I'm updating them pretty much every week, depending on how much news we're getting over at fantasylife.com. We've also got the rankings that we're keeping updated, but there are some names at the end. But it gets, if you've already built the Raven side of it and you need somebody from Houston, I think that's the fun time to go ahead and say, this is the way I'll make myself get some Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, just hold your nose, make the click, and then that's pretty much the end of your draft anyway. So you just file that away, and that's it. We'll see what happens like thereafter. All right, one more before we get on out of here today. Let's flip on down to the AFC South. I mean, we're already in the AFC South. Let me take that back since we were talking about the Texans, but we'll talk about the Jags. So Travis Etienne, I mean, one of the more, I guess, like workhorses from a running back standpoint last season, but maybe not for for 2024. I don't know. Uh, Doug Peterson asked about like where they're at on Tank Bigsby and what they can see for the sophomore runner in 2024. And Bigsby saying that at OTAs, I mean, the coaching staff needs to do a better job about getting Bigsby more opportunities while resting ETN throughout the season. That's per Mike Duraco. Uh, I understand the notion, but I mean, I think honestly, like Travis Etienne looked good enough in the role, having one of the higher team rushing rates like last season. That I think I lean more towards this being coach speak than anything else. But Dwayne, let me. Where do you see like Bigsby after the 2023 season, and should he actually get some more opportunities like for 2024?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to the Dameon Pierce thing, to be honest. Let's say maybe you got that Tennessee Jacksonville game stack going and you want to take your sixth running back. Or maybe you started, maybe the draft worked out in a way where you got a few running backs earlier and you're only going to take five and he's your fifth. Then, yeah, you just tack him on. But I think this is mostly coach speak. If you look back last year after the bye week, we did see the Jaguars. And if you guys are, subscribing to the Fantasy Life newsletter, you knew this in the season. We talked about the trend. I remember us writing about this, the utilization trends that were changing for Travis Etienne. One of the things we really like to look for are how do teams look coming out of a bye week. And the big thing was Etienne's downturn, in snaps. And his downturn in rushing attempts. 63% of the team's rushing attempts from week 10 through week 18. If you look at him in weeks 1 through 9, Chris, that was 72%, and his snap share was 81%, which clicked down as well, down into that 67% range. So the guy, though, that took over most of the work, what's interesting is when that happened last year, is it wasn't Tank Bigsby, it was Dearness
Nope.
Johnson.
Yep.
Dearness Johnson's the guy that took over the work. So I think it just really, and he's still on the roster, so it just depends. Like I think we need to really. I don't click on Bigsby a ton, so it's not quite the same as I felt about Pierce. I really feel like Pierce is probably the running back two in Houston. I think there's a chance Bigsby becomes the running back two in Jacksonville, because they've got that draft capital invested in him, but he's still going to have to show that he's not going to do the things early last season that basically buried him on the depth chart. The fumble inside the 5-yard line, not good in pass pro. There's a lot of warts in Tank Bigsby's game. Again, limited sample, but when coaches don't trust you, that's just huge at the running back position. Now, that's not uncommon for rookies. So Tank Bigsby now had a full offseason program. There's a chance that this is true. So I think we just kind of have to follow along. I don't care too much about what Doug Peterson's saying in May, but if we continue to hear similar things as we get into training camp, get into preseason games, we see how they're using these players. I think Tank Bigsby could become a guy that we're wanting to take more often late in best ball drafts. For right now, I'm only slightly mixing him in because there is a chance that Dearness Johnson is the two, or it's a split between those two guys, meaning there's not a running back two. There's just like there's guys basically making each other running back threes on the team. And that can be problematic. So we'll have to wait and see on Bigsby, but it's totally in the range of outcomes considering he's a young player And some of the things that he struggled with are the types of things that it's not uncommon for rookies to go through that. So I'm fine with him as a late round draft pick, but I wouldn't be mixing him in a ton until we get more information.
Yeah, and I think that's where waiting to see what we hear more coming out of camp, like maybe we start to get more of that drumbeat of he's really cleaned up his technique and pass protection. Oh, he looks great as a pass catcher. Like he's really worked on like how he like how like places his hands or something like that, like when catching the ball, so they don't go clanging off of his hands like into the arms of a defender, like that happened twice, like last year. I mean, just bits and pieces there to allow us to like have a bit more confidence in the fact that he started to clean up his game, starting to mature a bit more, like in the league, and then how he can take on a larger role for the team, and we can see a bit more of that work, that timeshare, like between him and Travis Etienne in 2024. But to your point, where he's being drafted right now, you're not really sacrificing a ton. So if you are trying to work in some of those, Trevor Lawrence stacks or something along those lines and targeting that Week 17 matchup, like for the Jaguars, man, I wouldn't mind. Like if you're wound up getting stuck drafting a guy like Bigsby, I mean, he could wind up evolving into that running back that you would want to have, and he gets that workload like later on in the season. So I'm completely there with you. All right, folks. I mean, that's all we got. I mean, we've kind of gone through some of the news and notes that we've been hearing over the past month, but of course, we'll be following along, and hopefully, you'll be following along with us. I mean, we've got plenty of news to continue on throughout the off season, but I mean, of course, we'll have Ian back with us like next week, so we'll be giving him, we'll probably spend like half the show just asking like what he did in Thailand. And figure out like how well like everything like happened for him like over there, because I'm sure he'll have some wild stories for us. But between now and like the rest of the offseason, you'll be hearing like just all the news, all the notes. I mean, all the highlights that we get. So regardless of if you're checking out the newsletter, go and sign up for that for free over at fantasylife.com. You'll find some of the writings from yours truly every now and again. I mean, that's where you folks need to be at. So subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to the newsletter, and of course, thank you all for following along. So I'm Chris Allen, your host for this week, and for Dwain, for producer James, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you all next week.